Good evening, and we are thankful for your presence here this evening for our Wednesday night Bible class. We are in a study of the book of Proverbs. We have been introducing the book, and we continue introducing the book of Proverbs because, frankly, there are so many details pertaining to the book that if left unsaid at the outset, then typically you're at about chapter 28 before you realize some of the things that would have been helpful to know all the way back at chapter 1. So that being said, as we look at some of these ideas pertaining to Proverbs, thank you, sir, that is spectacular. As we look at things pertaining to the introduction of the book of Proverbs, we've looked at details regarding the fundamental facts, the authorship, general ideas pertaining to wisdom. We've looked recently, the last couple of occasions, at the rhyme and the rhythm of Proverbs. We looked at the distich, the trisitch, the tetrastitch, the pentastitch, the hexastitch, heptastitch, octastitch, the maskil ode. And looking at those ideas and also looking at the parallelisms that are utilized, we simply overviewed the rhyme and the rhythm of Proverbs and of Hebrew poetry in general. They don't rhyme sounds as much as they do thought. We also, when last we closed, we were looking at the discussion of the heart. In the book of Proverbs, the word heart is translated from the word leb or lebab. There are only two occasions where heart is translated from a different word, nephesh, the idea of soul or spirit. Any other time it's leb or lebab. Frequently, the way the word leb or lebab is used, it mirrors our general usage of the word heart in terms of something that is pertains to the mind, the intellect, the emotion. But frequently, the word actually carries a meaning. It's still parallel to the way we use it, but much like our word love. Do we ever use the word love in such a shallow way that we really ought not use the word? The same can be said for the word heart. If we would think about what's really meant by the heart, the Hebrew use of the word hinges on the idea of the center of something, the core of something. We might call it the very fundamentals and the core of one's identity. Now, we want to review some of these that we've noted. 96 times leb or lebab appears in Proverbs. The only word from the Hebrew language in terms of major themes in the book of Proverbs, the only Hebrew word or word group that's used more often is the shacham or chakma, the word translated wisdom or wise. Think about that. What word would you expect to be second to wisdom in studying the book of Proverbs? What's the opposite of wise? Maybe fool? More is said about the very center, core, and identity of a person than is said specifically about fool and foolish in the book of Proverbs. We've not applied this. If we would think about some of the things said in this book, not only would it change our perspective in looking at who we are. How many people at some point in life have said, well, I'm trying to figure out who I am. I'm trying to find myself. Ever had that mindset? That thought? Has there ever been a point in time when you didn't know who you were? Who you were supposed to be? Listen to some of the things said in Proverbs as it pertains to the lebab. And the passages we're going to examine here are the passages that do not necessarily, they don't translate into the word heart. One will, and then at the end we'll note another. But these are other passages that likewise are worth noting how Lab and Labab is used and what's said about a person's identity or a person who doesn't know who in the world he is. Proverbs 4:23, keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Keep thy heart, protect it, protect the very core of who you are. That's putting a filter on what enters, but also on what exits. If I will set a guard dog beside what comes out of my heart, to realize that there are some things that ought not be exiting, then before long I'll start to think about those things that are in there and change them. Anyone ever had trouble with foul language? Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Now Jesus would say, out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh, Matthew 12. A person that has had trouble with inappropriate speech at inappropriate times, that vocabulary doesn't go away as though selective amnesia arises. But keep thy heart with all diligence. There comes a point where it's realized this approach to communication isn't appropriate. These words aren't suitable, or this topic is not suitable for this situation. And as we become more careful about what's leaving the mouth, we become more careful about what's circulating the mind and the heart, and it changes how we think. It changes who we are. Or you think about Proverbs 6:32. Whoever committeth adultery with a woman lacketh understanding. The word translated understanding is that lab or labab. Here's a person that commits adultery. And he's doing it because he doesn't know who he is. There are some people who deliberately refuse to acknowledge who they're supposed to be and who they are. Proverbs 6:32 does not convey the idea that the person that commits adultery with a woman is doing it because, bless his poor heart, he just don't know who he is. It's conveying the idea that he's decided to have selective amnesia regarding who he's supposed to be and who he is. Peter would say, of this they are willingly ignorant. 2 Peter chapter 3. Willful ignorance can apply to more than just willful ignorance of God's Word. It can apply to willful ignorance of who I am and who I'm supposed to be. Proverbs 7:7, similar idea. The one looking out the window of his house, he beheld among the simple ones, he discerned among the youths, a young man void of understanding. Void of labab. He doesn't know who he is, and so he's going the way of her corner. He's going toward that street corner girl because he doesn't know who he is. Or he doesn't care. He's rejected the idea of a proper identity. He's rejected the idea of who he's supposed to be. Sometimes it's translated in the other translations as the idea of he doesn't have sense. Well, there's a lot of folks that don't have a lot of sense, but they know who they're supposed to be. Proverbs 9:4, here's wisdom saying, to him that lacketh understanding. Wisdom is inviting the one that lacketh understanding, labab, the one that doesn't know who he is. Wisdom sends out a formal invitation. Then again, so does the foolish woman, Proverbs 9:16. So to those that do not know who they are, wisdom is calling, wickedness is calling. Who decides at which table they're going to eat? They do. Which brings us to this thought before we move forward. The person who's trying to find himself is engaging in the wrong pursuit. Proverbs 9. Wisdom sends an invitation. Wickedness administers an invitation. And each person chooses which invitation he accepts. It's not a matter of finding ourselves. It's a matter of deciding who we're going to be and what we're going to be. Is there a sense in which some people have to find what their interests are and what their skill sets are? Absolutely. But my interests and skill sets are not my identity. They're just extensions of various areas of interest. They're not who I am. Proverbs 10:13. Here's another one that deals with activity, reflecting of one who doesn't know who he is. In the lips of him that hath understanding, wisdom is found, but a rod is for the back of him that is void of understanding. There are some folks that aren't going to know who they are until they've been punished enough to realize they don't want to be the person that has to receive that outcome, that consequence, that result. A rod is for the back of him that is void of understanding. Anybody ever had a rod against your back? We call it a switch, right? Actually, I can remember my dad had a rod that had his name across the back of it. Because back then you'd get one of those, leather pieces of garment that would hold your britches up. When your children misbehaved enough, you weren't worried about whether your britches stayed up or not. You removed it. There are different forms of the rod. And it's worth noting that in the book of Proverbs, the rod is not only utilized for corrective discipline, but there are times that it conveys the idea of instructive discipline as well. That being said, Proverbs 10:13 is absolutely talking about corrective discipline. A rod is for the back of him that's void of understanding. A police officer approached a woman in a store whose children were blatantly misbehaving and told her as politely as possible, "Ma'am, would you discipline them now so that I don't have to do it when they're grown?" A rod is for the back of him that's void of understanding. And there are some people that will not choose to be different until they've had the punishment that causes them to realize their consequences. And when they don't get it at a young age, sometimes by the time they're adults, it's too late for them ever to learn. They've already decided who they're going to be. Proverbs 10:21. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for want of wisdom, for want of lebab. They don't know who they are. Whereas the lips of the righteous not only take care of themselves, but they feed others. The righteous, with their very words, are going to be looking out for the best interest of others. Fools don't know who they are. And this being in the context of things that are coming out of the mouth, resulting in what is available to go into the mouth. Here are the fools that because they do not know who they are, they do not know who they are supposed to be, their actions are leading directly to their demise. Fools die for want of identity, want of lebab, want of the Jewish concept of heart. Proverbs 11:12, he that is void of wisdom despiseth his neighbor. The word translated wisdom, lebab. He that is void of a center, he that doesn't know who he is, despiseth his neighbor. The English Standard has belittles his neighbor. You ever meet anyone that from the outset just has to belittle you? Anyone that's going to take every opportunity to show you how important he is, how little you know. You not met anyone like that? Mm-hmm. You know what the great shame is? When they call themselves members of the Church of Christ. And they know so little about God or God's people that they act like grade A royal jerks. And that's exactly what's being described here. He that doesn't know who he is belittles his neighbor. He has no idea who he is. He has no sense of self in a proper, constructive way. He has no sense of self-value, and so what he has to do is belittle everyone around him so that he can feel like something. There's a reason why God invented duct tape. Proverbs 11:12. He that is void of wisdom, understanding, identity, belittles his neighbor. But a man of understanding, and the word translated understanding in the latter part of the verse is a form of the word being. I think it's actually the to being, but it's the concept of seeing things from a different point of view. He that can not only see things from his own point of view, but from another's point of view. Pause. There's a disparity here. The person that doesn't know who he is incapable. His intellect, his mental ability, his noggin's capacity is not able to try to see something from someone else's point of view as well. And if I'm the person that can only see things from my perspective and from no one else's, it might be because I don't even know who I am. Moving forward. Proverbs 12, verse 11. He that tilleth his land shall be satisfied with bread, but he that followeth vain persons is void of understanding. The word translated understanding here, again, is the word most often translated heart. He that followeth after vain persons is how the King James has it, which frankly appears to be an unfortunate translation. If you'll notice in the King James Version, that word persons is italicized. They've supplied a word in order to try to make more sense of the passage. But it's not necessarily following after vain persons, although that could apply. The English Standard has vain pursuits. Vain pursuits. Think about the contrast being made here. Proverbs 12:11, he that tills his land shall be satisfied with bread. He that tills his land. What's a simple word to call that? He works. This is someone that is active and he works. He is working in a constructive, beneficial, productive way. But he that follows vain pursuits, I would work, but I'm going to binge watch 24. I would work, but I got to play some more Halo or Call of Duty or Call of Halo, or I don't know what's the recent game. I would work, but I would work, but I'm holding out for a management position. You dipstick, you can't even manage your own schedule, let alone manage anything else. He doesn't know who he is. And so he's too lazy to do anything, and he makes up excuses as to why he doesn't. Following after vain pursuits, trying to find fulfillment and identity in that which is empty, because he's looking for something that will elevate him above others. Proverbs 15:21. And again, please keep in mind that on the pages of the book of Proverbs, as we're moving through this, there are numerous times that the word heart appears that we are not noting. We are simply looking at some of the occasions when the word lab or labab is utilized, but it's translated something other than heart. Proverbs 15:21. Folly is joy to him that is destitute of wisdom. Labab, destitute of wisdom. He doesn't know who he is. Folly is joy to him. He does that which is foolish, that which is irresponsible, and he sees it as joy, fun. Here's the one that doesn't know who he is, and his most oft-repeated phrase is, hey, y'all, watch this. Folly is joy to him that is destitute of wisdom. He doesn't know who he is. Or maybe his folly is not going to be a foolish activity, but a foolish approach to other people. Maybe his folly is going to be a refusal to listen to other people, because fools, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. He doesn't want to learn. Foolishness and lack of identity go hand in hand. Foolishness, per Proverbs 1:7, refuses to learn. There are some people that refuse to learn because they are afraid of knowing who they're supposed to be, what they're supposed to be. Proverbs 15:32. He that refuses instruction despises his own soul. Well, this connects to what we just said. He doesn't want to learn. He doesn't want instruction. He despises his own soul. He's tearing himself apart. He's not worried about his own well-being, his own life. But he that heareth reproof getteth understanding. The one that hears reproof, the one that accepts correction, the one that is willing to listen to someone else say, hey, that's not right. He gets understanding. The word translated understanding, lebab. He's developing his identity. The one that's willing to receive correction is developing his identity, his core, the center of who he is. But the one that already knows everything, the one that thinks he doesn't have to listen, he's destroying his very life. Proverbs 17:18 is our next one. A man void of understanding, the word translated understanding, lebab, a man who doesn't know who he is, striketh hands, and becometh surety in the presence of his friend. When you read the book of Proverbs and you come across the word surety, you're looking at the idea, generally speaking, of a person who has become collateral in a debt. He is the one that is the guarantor in a loan. Anyone ever have a parent that co-signed on a loan so that you could get a car or buy a first house? You know, when you read the book of Proverbs and you come across this idea, the concept is not that it's always sin to co-sign on a loan. But by and large, and especially when you step back and you look at our society, how many people have the opportunity to be able to, and the situation in life to be able to earn enough money to buy their first car without any debt? How many people have the opportunity and situation in life to be able to earn enough money to buy their first house without any debt? The book of Proverbs is speaking against the idea of debt in general and becoming the collateral for the ones in that day and age who would be inclined toward debt. They were not living in a debt-oriented society. Frankly, they weren't living in the kind of society where the government and the insurance companies had ripped about 65% of the income from every family. It was a different day and age. At the same time, there's still a principle here to be kept in mind. And that's going to be the principle as it pertains to the idea of surety, that frequently there are those that are still wanting to buy that which they ought not buy, that is beyond their means. And the idea of the one who is becoming surety for his friend is the one who is supporting his friend in his pursuits of living beyond his means. I don't know who I am, and so I'm helping my friend get in over his head as well, and it's going to cost us both. Proverbs 19, verse 8. He that getteth wisdom loveth his own soul. He that keepeth understanding shall find good. Here, the word translated wisdom, he that getteth wisdom, is lebab. He that comes to know who he is, he's able to love his own soul. Hey folks, this one's vital. Parents, you bringing up young folks? You got some that are already grown, that are still trying to figure out who they are because they've not decided who they're going to be. You know any young folks that are looking for a spouse? I'll be happy when I can find a wife. Paul made a statement in Ephesians 5 that demands to be declared from the rooftops. Ephesians 5, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word. He might present himself a glorious church, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but it should be holy and without blemish. So ought husbands to love their own wives, even as themselves. He that loves his wife loves himself. No man ever yet hated his own flesh. You know anybody that hates himself? Or anyone that hates herself? He doesn't know who he is. She doesn't know who she is. If you know any single person who's like that, it's going to be good to have a nice, gentle, patient, at the same time, candid conversation about the importance of figuring out who you are before you attach your liquid, fluid self to someone else. Jacob had a son that was like water. Remember how he described Reuben? Reuben was as unstable as water. When I don't know who I am, I'm not stable. And not only will I not be able to be the benefit that I should be for myself, but not for anyone else either. And when I can't stand who I am, then I am going to look at anyone else that professes love toward me with a suspect lens. Love yourself. No man ever hated his own self, but loves himself. Well, Paul's speaking about the way things ought to be. Now you bring that back to Proverbs 19:8. He that getteth wisdom, lebab, his center, his core, he that knows who he is loves his own soul. There are too many people that they can't love themselves because they don't know who they are. And they don't like their lives because they live lives that are pursuing instant pleasure, like the one that committeth adultery with a woman back in Proverbs 6:32. Or he's pursuing that instant pleasure with the harlot of Proverbs 7:7. The one that lacked understanding, lacked identity. Or maybe she's the one that belittles everybody because she's got to find a way to build herself up, and she's been doing it for 60 years. And they can't stand themselves. Take a long look in the mirror with the Bible in your hand. Realize the face looking back at you can be the person that God wants him or her to be. God loved you enough to tell you exactly who you can be and what you can be. Love yourself enough to become that. Choose your identity. Don't find it. If you go out finding your identity, you're going to be like so many of these young people today that are being spoon-fed the doctrine of liberalism that says, oh, if you're 5 years old and you think you're a boy but you're really a girl, just go ahead and identify that way. Here, we'll take a knife to you and change things. Choose who you're going to be. Choose to be who God wants you to be. Let's train up our children in that way. Let's teach them Not the idea of doing what God says just out of some kind of rote ritualism, but doing it with a proper mindset. Proverbs 24, beginning in verse 30. I went by the field of the slothful and by the vineyard of the man void of understanding, void of identity. He doesn't know who he is. He's void of lebab. Now his stuff's all grown over with thorns, nettles cover the face thereof, the stone wall thereof was broken down. I saw and considered it well. The word translated well is lebab. I walked by the property of the man who didn't know who he was, and I considered it with every fiber of my being. I looked at how wayward and confused even his possessions give evidence of his mind being. And I looked at the one who didn't know who he is. And I decided who I'm going to be. Or perhaps better said, who I'm not going to be. I saw and considered it well. I looked upon it, received instruction. You had a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. One more passage. This time let's back up. Well, clicker's not working. Proverbs 3:5. Proverbs 3:5. Here is a chapter giving instruction to the son. It begins with verse 1. My son, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments. Thank you, sir. Let your heart, let the very fiber of your being, let your identity, let the center of yourself keep my commandments. Not let your hands keep my commandments. Let your feet keep my commandments. Not let your outward actions and your checklist keep my commandments. Let your heart keep my commandments. Oh, there'll be a benefit, son, length of days, long life, peace they'll add to you. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them upon thy neck, write them upon the table of thine heart. Lebab. Write them on the very fiber of who you are. You'll find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and men. This is instruction from father to son about who the son is supposed to be, his very heart, core, center, lebab identity. Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord with all thine hands. No, that's not it. Trust in the Lord with all thy works. No. With all thy doings. How do we go about teaching our children about God? Get up, we got to go to church. We've got to worship. We've got to sing this way. We've got to observe the Lord's Supper this way. We've got to, instead of we get to. We get to. We get to. Here's who He is. Here's what He's done. Here's what He's given. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, lebam, with all your identity, with the very fiber of who you are. Trust in the Lord. There are those that don't. You ever had a conversation with someone that decided, I believe the Bible's from God, but I don't trust everything it says? There's an inherent contradiction there that requires an abandonment of reason in order to adopt that perspective. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not to your own understanding. We live in a world of people that follow after the way which seems right to a man. They lean toward their own understanding. Why? Because they refuse to accept who they're supposed to be. They have refused to choose to be who they ought to be. They don't know who they are or what they can be. When you study the book of Proverbs and you come across this word heart and the other forms of it as they're translated, often understanding or wisdom, don't just think of it in the flippant, shallow terms wherein we often use the word heart. Think of it as a person's very identity. Matter of fact, think of it as your very identity. Do you know who you are? Who have you chosen to be? Thank you for your time tonight. We'll pick up here when next we meet, and we'll start looking at some timeless themes that come from the book of Proverbs and advance further from there.